really you have to be able to articulate what your mission is, and then you have to build a business model around that. I say often that at a baseline, business has two pieces. It's math and people.
You know, all you see on social media when it comes to success, supercars and private jets, very materialistic success is what you see.
What is success? And so many times it's do the grind and do the hustle, but at what point am I sacrificing something in my life?
To try to please God, we're so afraid about doing the wrong thing that we do nothing.
Business to me is like playing a game. You play it with your friends. If you're good at it, you learn how to play the game better, and it's more fun if you play it better.
Well, I can tell you this, success achieved without humility is going to be short-lived.
All right, well, welcome back to another episode of the Pay It Forward podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Keegan, and we also have the handsome one, Austin Seward.
Hey, everybody.
So today's episode, I'm super excited to announce our guest and who we have on the show. And so for me, I have known this guest for a super long time. She's been extremely influential in my life, and not only in my life, but my entire family's life. So my sister, my brother-in-law, even my wife have known this guest for probably close to 20 years now. And I would say it's somebody that I probably look up to and respect, and has had, outside of my family, has had one of the biggest influences and impact on my personal life. So, want to introduce Misty Lown.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's just super fun for me to watch you go into this new world of podcasting.
Yeah, so super excited to have you on. Why don't you just share, in case there are some listeners that don't fully know your backstory, but why don't you just explain a little bit of like your history and your background on how you got started and how you created your business and your studio?
Well, the studio is definitely the heart of what I do. So I'm Misty Lown. I have Misty Stance Unlimited in Onalaska. We just celebrated 25 years in business, and especially after coming through the last few years, that feels like an extra special accomplishment. And about 15 years ago, I started touring, speaking for conventions, writing for magazines, and really just sharing our studio story, which I thought was probably a fairly common way to operate a business. I was making a good living. I was having a good family life. We were having a positive impact on our community, and our kids were doing really well in dance. And what I came to find out is that that's actually not super normal. A lot of small business owners, whether they're dance studio owners or not, end up making sacrifices or compromises in some area, sometimes in order to keep their business going. So we would have people wait in line sometimes for an hour or 2 hours after a convention speech to say, how are you doing this? And I think maybe it's important to point out here to your listeners that a dance studio has retail hours. It's pretty much all nights and weekends. And you can imagine how once you have kids, that puts an extraordinary amount of stress on the family. And we had figured out, because we had 5 kids, had to figure out how I could still raise my own kids while equipping teachers to basically raise other kids in the classroom. And we had come up with a system for that. And it wasn't too many years on the circuit before I figured out that I had something of value that could help others. So we started taking phone calls and emails and tours to the studio, and then eventually we put that in a program we called More Than Just Great Dancing. And the idea was we wanted to find other studio owners who really believed that dance could be used as a vehicle for life lessons, but they also had a deep interest in making sure it was a sustainable business for their families and for their team, and they wanted to give back to the community. So I've now spent the last 12 years as founder of More Than Just Great Dancing. There's over 300 affiliated studios now across 38 states, several countries, and that group serves about 100,000 kids a week, and It's something I've been super proud to watch develop and grow.
Awesome. Yeah, so talk a little bit about that growth of, I mean, your story in terms of how your dance studio got started, I think is incredible. And I think it speaks to like having people and mentors and having somebody who has faith and trust in somebody, and then really showing them, watching that play out and showing them, I'm actually going to do something with that. It's not just, oh, I believe in you, good luck. So why don't you share a little bit of how your actual studio got started?
Okay, so to share that, I have to go back more than 25 years. So I'm a young adult, 20 years old, and actually 21 years old, and I'm Miss Lacrosse Oktoberfest. I got involved in the pageant program because I needed to pay for college, and I thought it would also be good helping me to develop my speaking skills and my interview skills. So I became Miss Lacrosse Oktoberfest, and if you're not familiar, that festival has a royal family, the top of which is the Festmaster. So we would go to different community events. We'd ride around on the float, and they're playing the polka songs, and the entire time, I'm waving to people, but I'm also chattering with my Festmaster saying, oh, I'm a dance teacher, and I would love to have a dance studio, and I just really feel called to do this. And I don't know if he actually front end believed in me or if he got tired of hearing me talk about it, because one day he said, okay, if you're serious about this dance school thing, meet me at Marge's Cafe on the north side at 5. And I said, awesome, we're going to dinner. He said, no, that's breakfast. And I had never seen 5 a.m., at 21 years old. So I went there and we sat down, and I think for sure I was definitely the only young woman there, and I was definitely probably the only one under 50. And even before we finished the breakfast, I shared what I wanted to do. He stood up and stuck out his hand, and this man's name was Deke Swanson, and said, I'm going to build you that dance studio. And he walked out the front door. And that was it. And I thought, I don't know if I should leave, finish my breakfast, cry tears of gratitude, run home and call my family. But that was the moment that changed my life. He additionally gave me a job in his construction and real estate management office so that I could continue to add the resources I would need for the obligations I would have for that build out and starting of the business. And yeah, he built me a 5,000 square foot, that was my starter, 3 studios. And when it came time to, this is a funny story, when it came time, there was no lease, and I had to figure out what to pay. And he said, well, this is the price per square foot, go measure it up. Well, I didn't even have a traditional measuring tape, but I had a costume design measuring tape, like for measuring kids for costumes. So I went and just end over end all the way around the building and figured out that it was just under 5,000 square feet and what my rent was, and started sending checks. And all these years later, we still have breakfast in our same spot at Marge's Cafe on the north side of La Crosse about once a month. In all of the biggest decisions of my life, I bring to Deke, because he's become not only, a dear friend, but a trusted advisor. He's like a father to me.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and then you honored him because, you just had your 25th anniversary recital, which I still go to because little Leora and obviously Kylie and Dennis are there. So that was super cool to kind of hear that backstory and have him stand up and be honored at that. So,
and I think it's really important. A core value for me is giving honor where honor is due. I think it's really easy, especially maybe for our students, for young entrepreneurs, to look at me and say, wow, she did this thing. Well, in theory, I did this thing, but I had a lot of help along the way. Maybe I would have gotten to where I am now, but possibly not as quickly, or not with as much momentum, or with as much ease as I did with somebody who mentored me and believed in me, and obviously with amazing staff members. So I think it's just really important in an age where you can scroll through your phone on Instagram and see influencers and successful people. The reality is there's an army behind each of those people, which is really why I agreed to come on this podcast, is because I like the idea that you're trying to kind of unpack the myth behind success, give people an opportunity to make that definition for themselves, and then also show them that really nobody does this alone.
Right.
For sure. Do you think that your definition of success has changed? Like when you were aspiring to be a dance studio owner, like what fueled that at that time, and how has that definition changed over time as your business has grown?
Oh, it's absolutely evolved. I can think back to the early days, and this is probably pretty common for a startup. I just wanted to prove I could do it. Because really at that point I was making a trade-off of pursuing becoming a professional dancer to open the dance school. And I think, that was misunderstood by maybe some people that I cared about a lot, saying, why would you give up? At that time, I had an admission to the Alvin Ailey American Dance Center's training program in New York City, and I was passing that up to stay home and start a dance school. And I think people said, why wouldn't you leave this small town in western Wisconsin and go do, what looked like the bigger, shinier thing? And I said, well, I felt called. It felt like a God calling to me to open this dance school. So I had this overwhelming need to prove it was the right decision and that I could do it. And really those first couple of years were spent just trying to make great dancers. I just wanted to prove that I was a good enough dancer and I could figure enough about teaching that the evidence would be these kids would be good dancers. The recital would be good. They'd be great dancers. But I will tell you what, that was pretty much a recipe for burnout because, and I'll unpack something here for your audience, in dance, the final outcome is a 2 to 3 minute dance, right? So, I mean, Keegan knows this. He grew up dancing in our studio, taught for us. You put in this entire school year and you get this 2-minute product at the end of the stage. So when you're looking at, just input and outcome, it's not a great return on the effort. So if it's only about, we're going to do all this effort and we get 2 to 3 minutes of this, wonderful moment, I just started thinking, like, is this really worth it? And then if you look at the life cycle of a dancer, many will dance for a few years, some all the way through high school, some even beyond high school and into a professional career. But the physicality of dance is fairly limited by age, right? Just like a NFL athlete, it does not go on forever. So I even started looking at that definition of, success as dance. And I remember I was emceeing a show. It was at Onalaska High School. It was a dance team competition. It was like all of a sudden I just had this breakthrough thought that this has to be about more than great dance if it is to have lasting value. And I was emceeing, I went off script and I saw all these moms coming in at the crack of clock in the morning, pulling the giant bags, and their kids have their hair in rollers and all this effort for the 2 minutes on stage. And I'm at awards, house is packed, field house is packed. And I said, parents, if you came here for your 2 minutes on stage and your award, you have absolutely wasted your time. And I'm like the MC of the show, and I could feel the air kind of, just go out of the room, and I could see the organizers. And in my head, theater style, I'm thinking they're going to put the shepherd's crook out, vaudeville style, and pull me off the stage or kill my mic. I said, now hang on. But if you came here and you danced all year long and you cheered for your child because they learned to finish what they start, they learn to get up when they fall down, they learn to care for their team more than themselves, then you have actually made the greatest investment ever, because this whole thing is about more than just great dancing today. It was the first time I had used that term, more than just great dancing. I mean, it just literally came out of me. There was a slow clap that erupted in the field house, and really it was from that moment that I really started to have what I think I would classify or characterize as a very meaningful relationship with the definition of success for my studio, because now I was in it so that everybody would learn these wonderful life skills and values out of dance. Prior to that, the definition of success was, did you learn how to become a good dancer? And that's not actually available for everybody. Right? Some may have physical limitations. They might not have the interest. Their parents not bring them to class enough. But when we expanded that definition of success to anybody in this program at any level can grow to be a great kid, learn these life values and these life skills, now all of a sudden I had something that I felt like I could be passionate about for a lifetime, not just as long as I could physically demonstrate the work. And that changed everything for me.
Yeah, I love that. How do you that vision in your head of how do you take those values that you have and what you see outside of just dancing and actually empower the leaders and your teachers within your business, other than teaching them to dance practically? How do you introduce those values into your teaching curriculum?
Yeah, so first of all, I think it starts with hiring. We used to, back in the early days, our hiring ad read something, do you have these skills? And we're looking for somebody with these skills. And now our hiring ad leads with, do you love kids? Do you care about empowering kids to have these wonderful life values? Do you also dance? And so I think the hiring is really important. We also employ a pretty large number of alumni from our program who grew up, and it is part of the DNA of a classroom that they were in, and that it's easy for them to pay that forward. But it's really embedded in everything we do, from the kickoff training to our weekly messages. We're always highlighting as much as possible where we can find success for everybody, and everybody can grow in life skills through dance. Now, I want to pause and say, this doesn't in any way give us a hall pass on the excellence of the pedagogy side. We produce excellent dancers. It just makes a balanced message so that there's value beyond the stage.
Love it.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. And obviously I worked for you, kind of was an alumni, was there for like a little bit, but that was my heart. And like I kind of said in the open, the influence and impact that you've had on my life and the opportunity to grow as a right? Because it goes beyond just, okay, kids are coming into the studio and growing as a person, but also like the employees and you providing a culture and an atmosphere for me to come in where I was, help provide for my family, but also the impact on my heart and my character. And you allowed me to be myself and to grow over those years and gave me a place and an outlet to still reach kids. Cause it was like what you said, I liked dance. I could do it well enough, I guess. But my heart was, I want to have a lasting impact and an influence on kids to help them grow up. Because for me too, I love dance and it's a beautiful vehicle, but it's not the end game. And so that culture that you provided was influential to my life. And I know that it'll always stick with me, and that you've just been one of the biggest one of the biggest influences and blessings in my life. And so
I love to hear that. And I think really for anybody who's leading a business, it's important to remember that we should be as much on mission for the people that serve the mission as the actual client or the customer base, right? I think sometimes in business, we can kind of somehow look past the people who are right here with us, shoulder to shoulder, and we're so focused on the business outcomes or the client or client acquisition or growth or something that's past here. But we are, I believe, called as much to serve the people who are serving the people as we are to the actual end user or client or product, whatever that is.
Yeah. And so we've been talking a lot about impact and influence. Do you have one memory or moment that sticks out to you of an impact on somebody's life or a kid, maybe while you were teaching, and then obviously now you're more behind the scenes and doing more of the background stuff, and how that's changed? Maybe a moment now that the leadership role and not so much the dance teacher. Do you have like a lasting impact moment that you can remember that comes to mind?
Oh, there are so many. And I think people, when they typically ask this question, they're maybe looking for a big one. But, anytime I'm backstage at a recital and maybe there's a child who's crying and they make it on stage and they make it through, and, that's the pinnacle of their experience. Or, maybe there's a wonderful senior on stage and that they come from a home that, maybe it's a broken home, and you're kind of holding that, a part of a parental role or influence, and that's a very special moment. Or, we just had an alumni graduate from the Naval Academy. I think that's an amazing thing, and not maybe a typical outcome of dance. And, not Naval Academy, Air Force Academy, but my father was a Navy guy, and I just think how neat that is that the discipline of dance, and there was a local article about her, really provided this baseline for her to go into this military service career. So I think at all levels, there's a common thread there in what I just described. It's when either dance, the teacher, or leadership, steps in and gets to amplify something that will carry with them past that time. And even if it's just, we gave you the confidence you didn't have to get on stage. Right. We gave you that second caring adult role that maybe was missing in your home life. We gave you this skill of discipline that is now fueling your career. Those are the things that I think mattered to me. And I have this Rubbermaid tote of cards that I've received over the years. And I call that my tangible retirement account. And I always imagine that, someday, at the end of my active career, I'll be sitting down and I'll be reading all of those cards and reading stories like that, or looking at the pictures and remembering those moments. And that, to me, will be the proof that what we did mattered.
Right. Yeah. And I agree. I mean, everybody talks about, I want to have community impact.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times the perception is it's this grand scale or this broad swipe of influencing a lot. But I think what your business and your dance studio has shown is impacting and having community impact is more about the one-on-one and the personal and the building up of each and every single individual kid, and the ripple effect of you've had a lasting impact on them. And then to think of the impact that they've gone back and had on their own community and in their own lives. And so to try to think back 25 years of your studio, how many kids have come through those doors and you have blessed and impacted and influenced, and then that's ripple affected out to the community. I mean, that's pretty crazy.
It's a pretty neat, I think, demonstration of the compound effect. We estimate at this point, of course, we didn't have software back in the day to count the students, but we estimate probably 15,000 Cooley Region kids have come through the program. And I would like to believe whether they came for 1 year and had one moment on stage where they felt confident in front of their peers or their parents, that matters, or maybe they went all the way through the program and got the discipline that fuels them to be a pilot in the military, that matters. So I think what's beautiful is it really doesn't matter if it's for a moment or for a lifetime. I think all of those contributions matter. And I would like to say, too, in all of this time of leadership, I think we've gotten it right more than we've gotten it wrong. But there's definitely been times where I didn't know what I was doing and I didn't make the right call. And I think I've had as much of an opportunity in this environment to learn and to grow as we offer to our team members or as we offer to our students. We want to be an environment of humility, of grace, and of continuous improvement. And I think that's another thing I want to highlight to the listeners. I think we feel like we have to get it right all the time, and there's just, mathematically speaking, that's not possible.
Right.
Hopefully you will get it right more than you get it wrong, and if you miss the mark, if you've blown it, own it, back up, learn your lesson, make your apologies where necessary, make a new path forward. And I think that's as important, I think, to highlight than maybe the things that we've done well. Yeah.
And then, so jumping out and switching pages, you are you're an incredible business woman aside from just the dance studio. So why don't you take a little time and talk about all of your other businesses and all of your other business ventures and what you have going on in your life?
Yeah. So when I start to describe this, it may sound a little bit like what they're doing what and they're doing what, and this maybe sounds like they're not related, but to me, the common thread is that I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur, and I'm borrowing that language from Marie Forleo. She was one of kind of the first entrepreneurial leaders I saw who had her hands in different things and felt like that was okay, even though they looked different. So consider myself to be that multi-passionate entrepreneur, and the common thread is that I like to build things. So when I was a young dance teacher, I liked to choreograph, and then I found out later I was better at choreographing business than choreographing dances, and that's really what I like to do now. I like to teach our team members just like I used to teach dance students, and I like to choreograph businesses. So we built, as we already mentioned, More Than Just Great Dancing. That's the affiliated studio program that is now nation and worldwide. And then we acquired a program called Youth Protection Association for Dance about 4+ years ago, and that's the nation's first safety and wellness program. Really excited that's coming up for a relaunch here very soon. And then my husband and I are also involved in real estate, and that's something that he got into when he decided that he needed more flexibility than his prior teaching career would allow, and that's been a wonderful education as well. So we have a retail store, and we at one point we had a dance festival and sold that. We had a I gotta think, online dance magazine, and we sold that. We published a physical dance magazine, so all sorts of things. But it really it's developing people, and it really is my way of creating. I just happen to not be creating in the classroom with dance as much as I am creating now with businesses.
And with all that going on, how have you been able to maintain that family life balance, right, between family, faith, and business? Because you have a lot going on. How have you, have you found it difficult? What have you learned, or maybe a lesson that you've learned on how to balance that with so much going on?
Yeah, so I think language is powerful. And when I was kind of early into doing more than one thing, I would really think about balance, and I would say, well, if there's only 100% of me, that means the studio's getting 60%, and then my family's getting 40%. But well, it's kids week at school, so it has to flip. And then somebody said, maybe instead of looking at it as a scale where nobody ever really wins, looking at it as engagement. So when you're at work, trying to fully be at work, and when you're at home, really shutting down the phone and the email and trying to be fully present. Now, I think, as I said before, I think we've been able to do that pretty well more times than not, but there have definitely been times where, I've had my head in my hands and I thought, I don't know if entrepreneurship and family life is compatible because there's so many competing demands for my attention. I think especially for a mom, and I'm just going to throw something out here for the ladies in the audience who are trying to build careers and home life and raise kids. I think women pull what my sister calls an invisible 90% at home. even in the most equitable of households, you could take the chore list and split it in half. You could take the bills and split it in half. But there's something I have found, and I've talked to many moms, where it tends to be the mom who is remembering the birthday gifts for the birthday party, checking to see if the shoes fit, filling out the field trip. My kids just had to get a physical for fall sport. So there is something that kind of naturally falls for me into my role as a caregiver. And I just had to be okay that sometimes that means that I'm not going to be able to do things at the business, it maybe in the way that I would want to. The benefit of that is it made me trust my team more, because I wanted to have that caregiving role at home and caregiving at the studio. And I think to a certain degree, I'm like, nobody can do it like I can. And I think everybody can do it the way they can. And I had to be okay with that. And that's a huge and ongoing lesson, that it might not be my way, but unless I let other people participate and do it their way, then it would all have to be my way. And that would not be an option, because I would not be able to contribute at home and at work. I wouldn't have time to, for the development of my faith or community contribution. So that's a continuous lesson of letting other people participate and to do it their way under the guidance of your values and, the vision of your company, but it just will look different, and to be okay with that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I've always heard that there's no such thing as work-life balance. There's a rhythm, right? And it's like you said, where you're prioritizing your attention and living where you're at presently. So can you talk a little bit about the transition from owning a dance studio to your coaching business? And that's obviously a completely different business model. Is that something that you were influenced from others and maybe had some help designing what that looked like? Because a completely different business model. So how did you establish what direction you wanted to take that business?
Yeah, it's interesting. I started thinking, I prayed about it for a year. I was thinking about it. And because as I mentioned, we were taking emails and phone calls and visits from folks who had said, hey, we think you're doing something interesting here. You could help us. And we just did it gratis. We thought it was the right thing to do. And then I thought, well, this is a terribly inefficient way to help people, in this very inconsistent one-off manner. And most of the questions were pretty much the same, right? They were trying to kind of figure out, how they could build a good business model, how they could maintain their family life, raise great dancers, have great dancing, give back to the community. So I thought, well, there's some themes here. So I actually talked to a mom at the studio who was involved in a local marketing company at the time. And I said, I'm going to bring in everything I have, and I want you as an outside set of eyes, kind of tell me what you think here could be packaged and would be interesting to other people. So we spent at that time what I thought was a significant amount of money investing and kind of packaging this up. Remember my husband saying, you're doing what? And, people weren't coaching wasn't really as big of a thing. Now it's just my entire Instagram feed. Yeah. But it wasn't really a thing in the way that it is now. And I remember our first shot at it, I would say we got like 60% right, meaning that we 60% forecasted what we thought would be helpful. And then that remainder, we built into something that people barely used at all. We spent a significant amount of time and money packaging our curriculum. And what we found out once we got into the marketplace is that most people had their own curriculum at their studio. They really just wanted help with that business, the life management, customer service, solving staffing conflicts, hiring. So I'm just putting that out there because I think it's okay if what you start with isn't what you end with. And now the curriculum that we have, which I think is a great curriculum, we produce great dancers, but it's probably the least utilized resource. And we had spent so much, of our early investment and energy really packaging that, and it ended up being they really wanted other things. So I think it's important when you launch to have the occupational humility to say, hey, maybe what I built is not exactly what people want, and to be adaptable.
Yeah. That's great. The people we were talking about before the show have had the same conversation with them. They're like, we were spending 90% of our time on doing something that was producing 20, 30% of our income, and switching the model to really what your customer base wants, not what you think that they want.
Yeah,
so.
And we've done that several times over the 12 years that we've been in that business. And, the world changes. We change. the customers change, the technology changes, my customers' customers change. So I think we just have to be open to continually going back to the drawing board and saying, is this the highest, best use of our organizational resources right now? And if not, then what changes do we need to make?
So speaking of the world changing, what impact do you see? I mean, our society's culture is changing rapidly. How do your core values, your moral beliefs of your business, how do you keep that steady amongst a culture that's rapidly changing?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ways, or an example I could paint that everybody would understand, whether they're in dance or not, is, when I started, whatever we did in our dance classroom, our students only knew that thing. And if we wanted to go see a different kind of dance or great dance, we had to go to the big city. We'd take a trip to Chicago or Minneapolis, go to a big dance convention. So a couple times a year, kids saw something other than what was inside of the studio. Well, now, just in the palm of their hand, they see far more of what's outside of the studio than what is inside the studio. So, that was part of my interest in becoming involved with Youth Protection Association for Dance, really was just saying, the world is changing. Kids at younger and younger ages are being exposed to more and more adult concepts and things. And, how can we kind of build bumpers and boundaries? It's called safeguarding capacity building. And that's a term that comes straight out of the UN, just the idea that as caring adults, it's our obligation to build bumpers and boundaries around children so that they have the chance to develop. I mean, we know now that their brain doesn't fully wire. That prefrontal cortex piece that governs logic and reason doesn't fully wire till most say 25. Some people are even saying now 29. So,
Oh gosh, I'm 29.
welcome to adulthood.
Mine might be 32. So
But, the more we are seeing kids come in at younger and younger ages, and they're having more and more access to the world, and I'll characterize it, or I'll tell a story that I think will capture how challenging this is for parents. When my kids were little, my husband and I said, we would never let our kids have a TV or cable TV in their bedroom, right? But they now have something that's far more powerful and dangerous than cable TV. And I heard once, I don't know if this is true, but the technology in our iPhones now is more significant than the technology that in that giant, NASA room that put the first rocket into space, right? So I don't know if that's a true story, but I think at least directionally, we all understand that tech is becoming more powerful. And I think we have to, as adults, be aware and keep pace with things and build our capacity for safeguarding. That means that we have to continue to evolve and to learn and to grow and to stay relevant and, be okay maybe being not cool for a moment where you're saying, hey, as for me and my business, we're going to do things a certain way.
Right, you got to look at it as protecting the innocence of kids and the youth, and that's obviously a big thing in dance, and which is why you started YPAD. Are you doing beyond that? I know because there's not, people might not know it, but there's not like a ton of laws and stuff around being certified as a dance instructor and the dance world being an artsy form.
Yeah.
There can be things that happen, and obviously
people are
now
always surprised about that. So
go ahead.
Sorry, I get so excited to talk about it. I do have to give credit where credit is due. So I did not come up with the concept of YPAD. So there was a wonderful artist. Her name was Leslie Scott Zanovich, and she was working as a professional dancer in LA. So she was, kind of at the end of when kids had come through their formative experience and kind of seeing how that played out and some of the damage when they got to the professional world. And she said, maybe there's something here. Instead of talking to professionals and kind of collectively, people were, having the same observations that early foundational experiences of kids when they're having complex and adult content exposure when they're young leads to, problems when they're older, mental health problems and physical problems and body image problems. So that was a nonprofit, and then I was asked to take it on in 2018 because we had the organizational resources to keep it going, and we've since rebranded as Youth Protection Association for Dance. And still, even though the movement's been going on for so long, people are still surprised to hear that there's no universal standard of care for dance. There's no requirement of a certification or of any education in order to be a dance teacher. We have no governing body. There's no singular national association for dance. So it really is, to a certain degree, the Wild West of youth activities. And I'm excited that we can bring forward these very accessible safeguarding capacity building, whether people just want to maybe take an online course in a single topic, or they want to go all the way through to pursue our certification. We now have an entire menu of options for people to say, this does matter. And I do want to start, this journey of self-reflection and to help our business, our parents, our teachers to build their capacity to safeguard kids.
Yeah, that's awesome. So maybe for some of our listeners, because I think a lot of people have ideas.
Yeah.
You've talked about many of your businesses and, hey, I have this great idea. Hey, I don't see a ton of boundaries. So I want to, I think it'd be great to set up boundaries and safeguards for students.
Yeah.
How have you found, or what have you learned of taking that idea and then implementing it into an actual business?
This is what I love about business. The action steps are pretty much the same. It doesn't matter if it's on the topic that we're talking about, or somebody wants to get into real estate or open a brick and mortar, kind of a Main Street store. Really, you have to be able to articulate what your mission is, and then you have to build a business model around that. I say often that at a baseline, business has two pieces. It's math and people. Right? Who are you going to serve? Who's going to serve the people you're going to serve? And how do you make the math work? Because there's a math component to business. If you're online, you're spending money on your platforms and maybe your learning management system and your digital ad spend. If you're brick and mortar, like the place that we're in, there's a rent or a mortgage associated with it and payroll associated with it. So you have to wrestle with, how do we get the math and the people part right? After you've at least come to a frontline thesis about that, right? This is my theory about how we're going to make this business work. Then there are three basic activities of business. The first is sales activities. And that is everything from creating awareness to getting people to try and eventually buy your product. Once they've bought it, they're now in what we call the service column. And that is that you need to deliver on what you've sold with excellence. And then the third column is there's all of these quiet back-end activities for us at the studio. We have accounting and calls and emails and newsletters, ordering costumes, making contracts for recital venues. So those three pieces are going on all the time. We're continuously creating awareness and inviting kids into our program, or at the national level into our coaching program. We've got the service that we have to serve with excellence, and we want this quiet back-end piece. So those are kind of, if you want to call it a two-layer cake, we start with, what's my theory on the math and the people? Is this a business model where we're going to have tons of clients and it's a relatively low cost? Or is this a business model where we're going to have a relatively low number of clients, but it's maybe a more elite product? That's that top layer. And then you have ongoing sales, service, and support concerns.
Love it. That's great. So what do you, what's one daily activity that our listeners can do? There's a lot of people that are listening that are probably young entrepreneurs, and you talk about putting that into action, but what's something practical that somebody can start doing today? Is there a framework that you'd recommend for putting those ideas on paper to implement them, or where should somebody start? What's one thing they could start doing?
Yeah, I think a great place to start would be carving out a consistent time and place each day to kind of wrestle with these ideas. I think entrepreneurs by nature tend to move in fits and starts. We're excited and our hair's on fire and it's all the things, and then we can let 3 weeks or 3 months go and life just kind of gets in the way. So developing a regular rhythm of maybe, hey, on Mondays I sit down and I think about my new mission, or on Mondays I think about marketing. I mean, my entire early days of business were governed by the alliteration of the week. I would say Marketing Monday, Team Tuesday, Weekly Wednesday Communications, Thinking Thursday, Financial Friday. It was a way I conceptually organized myself so that I wouldn't let things go by where I would, it'd be months otherwise without kind of addressing these core needs of the business. So if you're just on the concept side, just set a daily or a weekly time. Just say, it's an appointment with myself, just like you'd have an appointment with, your doctor that you wouldn't miss. Put it on your calendar and sit down and work through all of the steps we just talked about, from math and people, sales, service, and support. But if you're in it, then it becomes more granular. Maybe it is Marketing Monday in Financial Friday, and just making that appointment with yourself. We are so, how would I say this, good at disappointing ourselves. We won't disappoint other people, but we'll disappoint ourselves, right? I wouldn't not show up to my kid's activity if I could help it. If my child has a track meet, unless something happens, I'm going to be there. I prioritize that. But it's really easy for me to put Financial Friday on my calendar and say, well, I think I'm going to drive through the coffee shop. I have these other things. I really didn't finish my email. We just don't have a lot of problem not showing up for ourselves in the same way that we would prioritize showing up for other people. So that's something that I've tried to work on over the years, is to show up for myself and what I feel called to do.
Yeah, that's really good.
How do you balance? I think a lot of people feel that they're busy, but they might not be productive. So as an entrepreneur, like from my personal experience, there's so many different things. And you talk about the 3 different levers of service and acquisition and the overhead. Like, how do you identify what your high leverage activities are, and what amount of time should be focused on those versus the busyness and the details and the other things? And would you recommend hiring an assistant or having somebody that's helping with those little back-end busy details?
Well, I will say this is one thing I've not done well. I've always hired too late. And I think there's just an entrepreneurial tendency to think that we can or should have to do it all ourselves. We look at, well, it's, I'm going to put air quotes up, easy work. I can do my own calendar. I could fulfill that mailing. I can go to the post office. We feel somehow that, I'm being arrogant as an entrepreneur by saying, that's beneath me somehow to do that. That's not at all what I'm saying. If I'm choosing to have somebody help me with those activities, what I'm saying is that there are probably several people or many people who could help with certain activities. And as you keep looking at all your activities, eventually there's only one person who can do these activities, right? So just lay all your activities out. I love putting them on index cards because I can slide things around. I haven't found any tech product that can slide things around like index cards can, so I guess I'm old school that way. But you move your index. Let's say you have 50 things that need to be done in your business. Make a pile of things that many people could do. Make a pile of things that some people could do because maybe it requires a special skill or maybe they have to be in a specific location. And then you'll eventually get down to a pile that really you're the only one who can do that. There was a certain point where really only I could teach certain classes at the studio until I had to hire specialists. Or really only I could set the budget until we hired an in-house accountant. And the longer I've been in business, there's actually fewer and fewer cards left that only I can do, and that's a good place to be. And if I could admit one thing to your listeners here, it was a bit of a wrestling match I had to have with my ego to get to the point where I realized that I really was not super essential to the business anymore because most people could do most functions of the business. And then I came at peace with that. I thought that is actually a new definition of success for me, where I have been a leader who has raised up other leaders. And that's kind of where I am now in the second half of my career. We were using dance to raise great kids. And now I'm saying, okay, we have a pretty good system going for that. And we have a group of caring adults who believe in that. How can I now use my skills to raise up other leaders? And that's why I enjoy coming on talks like this, because I think somebody here is listening and they're at any point of the journey that I've been on. And hopefully they'll get to the point where they don't feel sad when their business doesn't need them as much anymore. They actually feel proud because they've raised leaders who can now do what only they used to be able to do.
I love that. That is great.
Yeah, and would you say that that's kind of how you keep your passion and fire going? Because after all these years and being an entrepreneur, busy schedule and traveling and speaking and doing this or that, how do you keep that passion and that vibrancy towards businesses to just keep going after,
I think that really is key. It goes back to, I think, my heart as a teacher. My very first foray into teaching dance, I'm 16 years old, and it's just, I have something inside of me that I'm so passionate. I want this, 3 or 13-year-old to get, right? And now that I'm 25 years into my career, I think of the skills and experiences that I have to share. And I'm very passionate in particular, as you probably picked up, about normalizing for moms that they can have different seasons of life. Maybe it involves being all the way at home, working from home, working for themselves, working for others, maybe working part-time, full-time, and just saying, how can I now equip other leaders to raise leaders or other leaders to kind of figure out how to put these pieces of life together so they can build something that they feel proud of.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's super awesome. So
you talked about hiring too late. When is the right time to hire? Is it when you have a certain dollar amount? Because it's like you said, that's kind of the math part of it too. Is you have to be able to pay those people. When is the right time to hire?
So that's a really, really great question. I think everybody wants a formula, but I think, as soon as you're getting into the red zone on a regular basis. So, think of a car. You can take a car into the red zone once in a while. Let's just imagine you're driving a stick shift. You can put it occasionally into the red, but you can't drive down the highway in second gear.
Yep.
Right? So I like cars, by the way. And I just think there were too many times in my business where we were operating at a velocity where it was the kind of the effective thing of just, I was driving it in second gear, but I was driving at 60 miles an hour. And it was burning the machine out. It was burning me out. So now when I look, I try to say, okay, how fast are we going to have to go? How many gears are we going to need? And I try to plan for that. And I always have to talk down my entrepreneurial self for a moment and say, right now you're going to have to spend before there's any evidence that you can afford this. Right? You're going to have to hire the salesperson before they've made any sales.
Yep.
You're going to have to hire the manager before any projects get taken off your plate. And I think that's where, as entrepreneurs, we have a little bit of the stumbling block because we're having to make that front-end commitment that we probably could do ourselves, and you're putting finances behind it before there's any evidence that that was a good idea. But I have almost always hired too late, pushed in the red zone just a little too long. Now, I'm happy to say I do that less often, and I do it for a shorter length of time now. But man, in the early years, I think there were years where I would look back and I say, I should have hired this help in the office or this help in the classroom much earlier. So I just want to encourage everybody. My mentor, Darren Hardy, says that great people are free. And that's a mindset I've worked really hard to adopt. Just the idea that if you bring somebody in who is for your mission and they're of quality, they're free and they come with a payment plan. You're promising a certain salary, but they come with a monthly payment plan. If it doesn't work out, you have not actually made that full investment. You can go a different direction. So great people are free.
And you mentioned Darren Hardy. Can you speak to the importance of continued personal growth?
Yes. I think this has been just such a key. And for me, it was also getting outside of my industry, because I think inside of the industry, there tends to be a certain amount of repetition or a certain amount of, the same people that you hear from. So for me, I got a gift subscription to Success Magazine from a local real estate leader whose name is Marv Wanders. He had kids at the studio, and he said, I think you're doing great things, and I think you'd enjoy Success Magazine, which put me on their mailing list. And they had an opportunity to come work directly with the publisher of Success Magazine, and I applied, and I got a spot into that. And I can say unequivocally that changed my life. I met the greatest group of mentors through that program. Darren has become a personal mentor. I've gone through every product, every level of the program. I just know that in the seasons where I continue to grow myself and I continue to learn, things move much more consistently, much more reliably. When I say, I could probably skip out on going to this seminar this time, it doesn't hurt me the first time I skip out, but over time, I definitely all the time see that we lose momentum. So it has become a discipline. I mean, just like, eating good food is a discipline that I try to stick to. Moving my body is a discipline. Working my mind and building relationships has been a core discipline that when I've nurtured those habits, they have always proved beneficial for me, for my team, for our mission. And whenever I say, I could probably, pass on that for the next few months, again, on day one, it doesn't hurt you. But on day 90, you're kind of like, what are we doing? What are our goals? Where are we going? And you think, oh my gosh, I've drifted. I think it's just a natural state of the human condition to drift. We drift in our relationships. We drift on our finances, on our fitness. And so I try to build bumpers around my own life to keep me from drifting as much as possible.
I love it. And he had a sales competition, didn't he?
Yeah,
recently?
a referral competition. Yes,
a referral competition. How did that go?
It went great. I won the car.
What kind of car?
It was actually Darren. Well, I like cars.
Exactly.
It's Darren's personal Maserati. It was his 2011 Maserati. And a fun story is the first time I had dinner with Darren and his amazing wife, Georgia. he actually drove up in that car. That was back in probably 2012. And I remember thinking at that time to myself, I wonder what it would be like to drive a car like that. And then, all these years later, you were meeting at a restaurant in the same area, and he's actually handing over the keys to that car. And here's what's fun about it. I know, I like to say, and I like to drive the car, talk about the car. But the reality is the real win is that I went through the program enough to actually build a life and a business that I love. And I introduced the program to enough people that made me a candidate for winning the car, but they are also now speaking the same language and building a life and a business that they love. So I truly do enjoy driving the car, but when I think about it, it really is it's symbolic of the wonderful things that led up to that point and how it's having a wonderful impact on others.
Very cool. So maybe let's go a little bit off topic.
Okay.
Just because, I have ADD and I like bunny trails and all that fun stuff. So recently, I just like a personal thing, unrelated to business, we obviously had a bunch of flooding, and I mean, it was all over national news and stuff, but you were personally right in the middle of that.
We were in the water.
Just talk about that experience just from a life experience. I mean,
Yeah.
it was pretty crazy.
Well, I think I have a good kind of like a moral of the story and a funny story to tell about this. So I'll back up. When we built our house, we had young kids, and I remember saying to my husband, "You're spending what on foundation? We had to put these boulders in our yard and these, deep foundation walls." And at that time with small kids, I wanted more storage and better appliances. I just really thought the building budget would have been better spent towards things that would make mom life easier. Well, 15 years later, when the water's nearly up to your front door, all of a sudden I thought, all of that front-end investment, building unseen things, really, really mattered. Actually, it reminded me of the parable about the man who built his house on a rock versus on sand. And I think there's a business application to that, right? Where, there's so many times we have to make a choice to invest in the unseen thing, have the unseen conversation, especially, I think, in a performing arts business. We prefer the things that are seen and celebrated and that are on stage. But, we have to buy a new software and invest in a security system and things that, maybe aren't valued until they're really needed. So that was a big lesson I took away. But on a funny story, I said to my husband, I think I'm going to head out with the dogs for a few days. I don't want to have to swim them in and out each day to go to the bathroom. But my husband and boys chose to stay, and he would put his waders on each day, put the boys in the canoe, and drag the canoe down the street to where the truck was, and then take them to school. So I thought, that's such a boy thing, to choose the adventure of canoeing to school, as opposed to just coming with mom where it's dry.
No, kayak to go get your mail. All that
Yep.
stuff. Yeah, Missy's right in the water. So
That's
it was
crazy.
Yeah, it was full go on that. But yeah, I really think the analogy is super applicable.
Yeah.
I mean, social media and kids and entrepreneurs, we like the flashy stuff. We like the end. We see, this person's driving this car, doing that. And they're not seeing the foundation of 15, 20 years of disciplined work and putting in the effort and the time. We just want the end result. We just want the flashy. I want the appliances. I want this and that. But what builds it, what comes on it, is the actual foundation and the stuff that nobody sees in the day in, day out work. So that's super applicable.
That's why they say that an overnight success is 20 years in the making, and I think that's certainly been true in my life. By the time maybe I was recognized as a respected leader in dance, I had 20 years into this, right? They say that mastery is 10,000 hours of putting your heart and soul into a single objective, and we've certainly put that time in plus more. And I think an encouragement to people listening is just keep doing the unseen work, even if it's not celebrated. And I think that's an extra challenge right now for people who really live online and everything just looks great. If you're a young mom, your feed's going to be filled with people having, wonderful unicorn sparkle, birthday parties and everything looks perfect. If you're a young entrepreneur, you're going to be fed a feed that's basically designed to tell you that everybody else is doing it better. So buy the things and certainly invest in yourself. But the best investment you can make is just the daily rhythm of family, of faith, of staying focused on your mission. I mean, for me, I think that has been super key. And again, anytime I've kind of let those rhythms go and I'm not investing in my learning, or I haven't stuck close to family or faith, or I'm not focused on the rhythm of my business and I drift, pick my head up, 60, 90 days later, I'm like, whoa, what happened? Why haven't we made progress? Why do I feel overwhelmed? Why do I feel lost? Why we're not seeing the results or impact that we started this for? So I think just the more we can do that, the better off we are.
Awesome. What
So,
else?
so I mean, can you speak to the influence of faith in
Yeah.
your personal life and in your business?
Yeah, I just stood on recital stage. Over 4,000 people came through recital, and I always try to be very clear that, our program, the impact of our program is an outcome, of the time that I've spent in quiet, praying for guidance and relying on my faith. And it is that informs how we see the dignity and the value of the children and the efforts that we put in. I think if I were to stand on the stage and take the credit because my name's on the building and kind of put up the impression that it's just all about me, or it's just even about my team, me and my team, or about these kind of physical efforts. I mean, I can definitely say for sure my faith was tested to an extreme during the pandemic. When every day it was a new thing and a new challenge, and we had to get 300 dance schools, through the different challenges and their 300 unique situations. And that was a very refining period for me, because I think sometimes you can get to a certain period of success and almost believe it was you, right? And I mean, I always knew it was the Lord, but almost believe, your own press like it was you. And then you get to something that's far, far outside of your ability to control or create or choreograph. Yeah. And I literally spent so much time by myself and on my knees saying, God, you have to show me a way. Like, you have to give me an idea. I am facing something I don't have a playbook for. I don't know how to navigate. I'm not sure what to do. And as difficult as that was, I'm really grateful for kind of pulling me back to that reminder that I cannot do this on my own. I cannot do this even with the help of my team. For me, I just have to stay close. I have to stay close to the Lord for me. And again, that doesn't mean we always get it right, but I always know where I can go back to if I get it wrong.
Absolutely.
I've always said I can't imagine being an entrepreneur and not being a Christian. Like, there's so many ups and downs in business and finances and hard conversations. And if you don't have that solid foundation of your faith, I just can't imagine going through business that way. Maybe some of your coaching clients and business owners that do you notice a difference of those that are Christians that aren't Christians in business?
Well, here's what I'll say is, in the early years, I spent a lot of one-on-one coaching calls. And a lot of times they would ask me questions that I had a ready answer for. Oh, at our studio, we do it this way. I remember what that felt like to be there. This is how I handled it. But there were certainly times when people brought challenges and questions I didn't have experience or answers for. And I would say, I am so sorry you were going through this. I don't have a quick fix for you, but I will pray for you. And I have never had anybody of any faith background or no faith background turn me down. And I think that just speaks to that piece of our human spirit where when we really get to the end of ourselves, I think there is something inside of us that just says, help me, God. Yep. God help me. And that's been some of the most beautiful moments for me of teaching dance and of doing the coaching, is the time when it just goes beyond the topic that's the obvious topic, plie, tendu, arabesque, pirouette, fixing a business, budgets, P&Ls, and you really get to the heart of life. And I think as I get to, through the second half of my career and I look back, I'll be most proud of the moments where I encourage people not to give up, that they have a worth that is inherent. It was set at birth. It was 100%. Nothing they could ever do would add to that or take away the love of God for them. And, to hope that in some way, shape, or form, that love and care and grace that I showed people will hopefully spill over to other people. That makes me really excited.
That's awesome.
That's a beautiful note to end on.
For
so
sure.
Again, I'm honored to have been able to invite you onto this
me.
podcast. And it was a great conversation. And yeah, again, I just really appreciate you. I know our listeners will love it. For all the listeners out there that have listened to this podcast, Misty is the real deal. The most faithful, loving person in business I've probably ever met. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it. And if anybody has follow-up questions, certainly can reach out to the podcast and they'll pass them on. And I'm just super proud that, here we have two people in our community stepping out and taking a new leap of faith, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
We appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. We sincerely hope that you learned something today. And as always, We appreciate your support and hope that you can all find a way this week to pay it forward.